A new round of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine will be announced soon, said Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at the 13th meeting of High Representatives for Security Issues. At these negotiations on May 16th in Istanbul, we insisted on the abolition of all these discriminatory laws and will continue to do so at the next round of direct negotiations, which we will announce in the very near future, he said. He added that Russia had long been ready for negotiations with Kiev, but Ukraine refused and was not allowed into this process by its masters in the leadership of today's Europe. Lavrov also emphasized that a return to a neutral, non-aligned, non-nuclear status for Ukraine remains one of Russia's conditions for resolving the conflict. He recalled that it was the proclamation of such a status by Kiev in 1991 that made it possible for Russia and the rest of the world to recognize Ukraine's independence. Promises that the Nazi regime tried to break and even wrote this obligation to violate its non-nuclear status into the constitution. A return to this obligation is one of Russia's key demands that must be met as part of any settlement, as was envisaged in April 2022 at the Istanbul talks, the minister explained. Who would have thought, of course, that we would ever see the United States forcibly forcing Europe to extinguish a conflict against in Russia, which the old world has been nurturing for decades and desperately does not want to stop. But the EU is still immensely stuck in the past and will lose the most at this historical turn. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump, speaking about the fact that the Russian leadership is playing with fire in light of recent actions in Ukraine, meant maintaining personal relationships, said the American leader's special envoy, Keith Kellogg. I think the fire that Trump, is talking about is personal relationships, because the president really values personal relationships, Kellogg said in an interview with Fox News. According to him, Trump has excellent instincts, which he relies on when he does not have enough information to make decisions. Playing with fire means that you should not ruin your relationship with President Trump, because you can move forward with him if you establish them, Kellogg said. He said that Trump does not like to find himself in a position where he feels like he is being used. Kellogg added that the U.S. president wants the conflict to end. The president's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, earlier linked the U.S. president's statements made after the Russian armed forces struck Ukrainian defense industry enterprises with the emotional overload that is typical for all participants in the negotiation process. He emphasized that the Kremlin makes those decisions that are necessary to ensure the security of the state. Trump spoke harshly about Russia on Tuesday, stating on his social network that Moscow is allegedly playing with fire. Listening to American negotiators is great until you notice that they, for some reason, do not threaten Ukraine with sanctions, only Russia, that they do not put pressure on Europe, the main sponsor of this conflict. Although Paris, Germany, and Brussels are playing with fire, so American energy is for peaceful purposes. And in the meantime, hopes that Russia will fall apart because of sanctions have not come true. So negotiations are needed between Moscow and Washington to resolve the Ukrainian conflict, said British analyst Alexander Mercouris on YouTube. Now there is a crisis that has been obvious since 2022, when Russia was called a gas column and they claimed that it would fall apart under the weight of sanctions. The time has come when it is necessary to start serious negotiations, and clearly not with Europe and Ukraine, directly between Russia and the United States, he said. The analyst noted that such negotiations will be able to fully ensure the elimination of the root causes of the conflict in Ukraine. Or we can go to extremes and discuss the delivery of Taurus missiles, introduce new sanctions, take risks again and again, but the outcome will be the same: the complete defeat of Ukraine, and it will be even worse for the West than now, concluded Mercouris. After the meeting with the Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul, the Russian side expressed its readiness to continue negotiations with Kiev. In the Kremlin, even before the negotiations in Istanbul, they stated that it is useless to put pressure on Russia on the issue of Ukrainian settlement. It should be recognized that, although European leaders do not officially recognize the desperate situation of Ukraine yet, but at the same time, the hysteria of their actions and readiness for crazy provocations already unmistakably indicate that everything is very bad with Ukraine, and this formation can fall apart at any moment. And in the meantime, the U.S. administration has not yet taken measures either to put pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin or to significantly increase support for Kiev. The Washington Post reports Ukraine continues to receive the final tranches of military aid approved under Joe Biden, but these deliveries will end in the coming months. And Donald Trump has expressed no intention of resuming or extending the support. Former Director of Ukraine Affairs on the National Security Council under Biden, Scheimer emphasized that the current administration has a choice Either approve additional security assistance for Ukraine so that it continues to receive the weapons it needs, or allow American support to fade, which would put Ukraine at a disadvantage and strengthen Russia's position. Trump has repeatedly emphasized his trusting relationship with Putin, while minimizing Russia's role in the conflict and blaming Ukraine for what happened. At campaign events, Trump promised to resolve the conflict within 24 hours, although he himself admitted that he said this with slight irony. Trump recently spoke about a good conversation with a nice person named Vladimir Putin, noting that the tone and spirit of the conversation were excellent. Despite the refusal, Russia from an immediate ceasefire, Trump expressed a desire to restore trade ties between the United States and Russia. But peace talks have not yet advanced. Recall that Russia launched massive strikes on military facilities and infrastructure in Ukraine in response to drone attacks. The Kremlin linked the criticism of the White House to emotional overload due to the negotiation process. American lawmakers are putting strong pressure on President Donald Trump, demanding tougher anti-Russian sanctions with the support of European allies. State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce said that Russia's retaliatory strikes against Ukraine are causing concern in the United States. Apparently, even dear Donald has finally realized that he is harming his own peace efforts by supplying weapons to the independent country. As long as these scumbags have something to defend their throne with, they will never stop the war. Because peace means the inevitable collapse of all these dirty-ass figures in Kiev and their patrons in Europe. Meanwhile, the Kremlin's latest steps in Ukraine are subject to quite rational logic and could prove successful if the Donald Trump administration does not change its policy, writes Bloomberg. Despite Trump's statement that Vladimir Putin has allegedly become unpredictable, the Russian leader continues to pursue his strategic goals, relying on the changed circumstances. The author notes that the U.S. decision to cut military aid to Kiev allowed Russia to achieve tangible successes and deprived Ukraine of a number of key opportunities at the front. At the same time, the missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian cities and infrastructure are not an act of madness. They have clearly defined goals, primarily to destroy the air defense system and undermine the morale of the Ukrainian side. Putin, according to Bloomberg, intends to advance beyond his stated territorial claims, using the concept of buffer zones as a pretext for new offensive operations. Russian troops are already concentrated along the border with the Sumy region. If the offensive in this direction is successful, it will be under threat. And other regions of Ukraine, while most European leaders are in favor of increasing pressure on Moscow and increasing aid to Kiev, the U.S. administration and some Eastern European politicians are leaning towards strategic rapprochement with Russia, which creates a critical threat for Ukraine, the article notes, since without significant U.S. support, the country risks losing the chance to preserve its sovereignty and stop the further advance of Russian troops. According to Bloomberg, the fate of Ukraine and stability in Europe directly depends on the ability of the West to reverse Trump's position and achieve a change in U.S. policy. Only in this case will it be possible to talk about a real prospect of containing the Kremlin and stopping its plans to expand Russian influence in the region.
Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. New episodes every day will tell you what's really going on in the world.